This training video is related to Simplicity Direct to Practitioner platform. The goal of this video is really to support the end use of Direct to Practitioner client as it relates to how the orders funnel through the platform. This video will start from the point of the program being set up and active within the system. So the very first page that I've landed on is the dashboard page. So the dashboard page is available. It is real-time information that feeds in on the overall health of the client as well as a specific program. So these first two dashboards will provide information at the client level. So in this first example, you can see orders that are past the status time threshold. So we have thresholds in place for each of the statuses within the system, and then any orders that exceed that threshold will show up in this dashboard. You can actually click into the individual bar and get a modal of what orders make up that specific bar. This second dashboard is also a dashboard that relates to at the client level, so you can see orders that are within SLA but at risk, and also orders that are past SLA. This SLA is what is configured at the time the program is set up, and we're tracking from the time the order is received up until the ship status. Once an order is in a ship status, it will be removed from this dashboard. Each of the additional dashboards below are at the program level. So on this filter panel, you can come in, you can select a specific program. Based on that specific program, you would see the results for your additional dashboards. So we have a dashboard for your monthly order statuses, so you can see how you're trending month over month for your different orders. Again, clicking on any bar will bring up a modal, so you can see the orders that make up that number. We also display the quantity that makes up the number on the bar as well. These arrows on the left and right hand side will actually allow you to navigate from one month to the other, and all of this information is based on the order received date. So if the order is received in August, the end is put on hold, but then in September is released from hold. When you run your September or look at your September dashboard, you will no longer see that order in that count status. We have additional dashboards, so we have your weekly order trends, your 14-day event trends, and again, you can go backwards in time to see what your results were for that period of time. Your 14-day events, your weekly communication trends. So this is your AOC letters, your exception rejection letters, any outgoing SRFs. All of that would be visible in the dashboard as well. And then finally, your monthly SVL trends. So you can see both from an outgoing and incoming SVL, the status of the signature verification letters that were being sent. Anytime you want to do a refresh of the dashboard, you do have the ability to click a refresh dashboard data now, and that would take in the most up-to-date information based on the activity that has occurred in between your last refresh of the page. The expectation is that dashboards are reviewed on a daily basis so that you can actually prevent any orders from missing their SLA, or also help communicate if we start to see trends of increased rejection rate or decrease in inbound SVLs, for example. In addition to the dashboard, there's a panel on the top of the Simplicity DTP platform. This panel will be different for each user based on the user role that is assigned in the platform. So when we set up an account, we will create role access. So depending on your role will be what you can see and do in the platform. For example, a data entry user would see the data entry tab, but a business admin may not, unless their job requires access to the data entry. Very similar to mitigation. Typically, what you see across all users is orders, offers, HCPs, communication, and reports. The administration tab is only visible for certain users within the system, and this is really tied to part of this when we're setting up the product, how we import your products, your programs, your users, and your roles. So I'm going to start with the Orders tab. So the Orders tab will, for your specific account, your Orders tab will show all the orders and also the status of those orders. If you have more than one program for your client, it will show you all orders across all programs. Very similar to what I showed on the dashboards, you will have the ability to come in and search by program name, job number, or if you're looking for a very specific order, you can do that by the form ID, order number, or external order ID. So in that case, the MSC order ID or the Viva order ID. You also can come in and search for orders in a very particular status. So if you want to take a look at, your lost in transits or your potential lost in transits, you can do that as well. You can come in and look for status reason type. Status reason type is a bit different in the Simplicity DTP engine than it is in other applications that we've used. So the status reason type actually takes your individual reasons, reject and exception reasons, and buckets them into groups. So for example, your DEA or your SLN will show up as a status reason type. When you click into the order, you can actually see the reasons why, what that make up that status reason type. So for this example, you see this order has SLN errors. If you were to click into the details of that order, you would actually see if it's what SLN specific rule is causing it to fall into the exception status. Finally, you can look up orders by the order date, the requester information, or the recipient information. So requester and recipient relates to an HCP, so the person requesting the samples, and the recipient is the person who's receiving those samples. In most cases, your requester and your recipient are the same. Where that changes is in your institution-based programs. We do have the ability to send a sample to an alternate address that has been requested by the HCP. And then there you can actually search for that institution information. And then finally, we do have the ability to look for a rush order. This rush order is a flag that is visible on our data entry screen. So if we do receive a call from a client that says they're getting ready to fax in a sample request form and we need to rush that, we can go ahead and select that rush flag as part of at the time of data entering the form, and that rush flag will actually bring that order through the business rule queue ahead of all other orders that are waiting to be processed. This rush flag does not change the shipping method, so it's a standard shipping method that is set up at the time the program is created. Going into a little bit deeper with orders, at any point you can always collapse your filter to get a little bit more real estate on the screen. But at any point, we can go into the detail level of an order. Once you go into the detail of an order, you have this left-hand navigation. This left-hand navigation actually breaks the order down into specific pieces. So your order header is your preliminary information. You can see the order status, the order number, an external order number if one is included with this program. What type of order is this? Is it an HCP order? Is it a direct-to-patient order? When this order was received, how long has this order been in the status? As mentioned, you'll see the status reason type, and you can click on and actually see the specific reasons that cause that order to fall into that exception status. You can see the client, you can see the program name, and then you can also see where the order came from. So did this order, in this case, this order came from my sample closet, and it failed for missing, it's an exception for SLN reasons. We also have a life cycle bar. So at any time you can come in and see where we are in the status of this order. If an order hits a point in its life cycle that causes an exception or a stop of the process, that green checkbox would be updated to orange. indicating that there's a problem, and then all other statuses in that life cycle would be grayed out. In addition to your order header, you have the ability to come in and see your HCP and rep details. Rep details would only be visible if your program is configured as a rep program. Each of the panels are expandable and collapsible. So as you can see, I expanded the order header details, which is what I clicked on the left-hand nav. You also can see this lock record button. So depending on your permission, you do have the ability to come in and lock this record. If you lock this record, it will allow you to edit certain aspects. So maybe you receive a phone call that the zip code was keyed incorrectly and you need to correct the zip code. You can lock the record, and if you're given the permission based on your role, you can actually edit that record. You can also edit the quantity of a record. The quantity of a request can be adjusted down. If you need to adjust the quantity up, that is an advanced permission, and you would need to get approval before the quantity was adjusted up. In this panel, you can actually see the rep and HCP information, as I mentioned. And then I'm going to move over to the order details. So within the order details, you'll actually see the product that was ordered, the status of that product, the quantity that was ordered, if any quantity was adjusted. So as I mentioned, if you have the permission, you lock the record and you need to adjust the quantity of the auto includes. When that order ships and we receive the information back from Scale, you'll receive the quantity shipped. Once we receive delivery confirmation, you'll receive the delivered quantity. If that quantity needs to be adjusted, once an order is moving to the delivery status, so maybe a box was damaged and 5 units were supposed to be delivered, but only 4 were delivered, you'll have the ability to come in and do that adjusted delivery. And then the return quantity. So if throughout this entire process, if any order comes back, we'll capture that information and we will update the quantity returned. We also store the unit of measure. So the unit of measure is something that actually comes in from Scale and is verified during the program configuration. But this unit of measure will explain how the item was shipped, whether it was at each pack case, for example. Throughout this entire platform, you'll see little blue icons referencing information. This is helper text. So this is helper text that will help you navigate through the site in case you have any questions on how any of these fields are populated. In addition to order details, we also show the delivery details. If this order was in a delivered status, you would actually be able to see when the order was expected to ship, when the order shipped, what the carrier and freight code were, and then when we expected the order to deliver and when the order finally delivered. And I'll pull up an example of a delivered order to show you the details of that. Order attachment and comments. So any attachments that come in for this order will be visible through the order attachments page, as well as any comments. Again, if you lock the record, you do have the ability to come in and enter a comment. So if you adjusted the order quantity and you want to go ahead and make a comment why you adjusted the order quantity, you can do that through the comment section. Different places within the platform, there are times where we do force a comment. So if you're editing a record, we will enforce, or if you're updating a loss in transit status or an SVL status, the system will require you to enter a comment of what action you took. You also have the ability, depending on the order status, to come in and cancel this order. What this does is it actually sends an intercept request down to Scale. As long as that intercept request is successful in Scale, then it will cancel the order within the Simplicity platform. By doing this, you no longer need to enter in an intercept request within SharePoint. There are times where the cancel order will not be available, and that means the order has reached a status within Scale that won't allow us to intercept it. So most likely it's in the pick-pack stage. If that's the case, then you'll still need to follow your normal process that you do today and work with the inventory in the warehouse to have that order canceled, successfully intercepted and canceled. Today, that cancel order cancels the order in Simplicity, it does not put that order into back order. So if you do request a cancellation, it will cancel that order. Once that order is canceled, you will have the ability to do a replacement order if need be. Communication history. Much of what I'll show you today will carry over where you can see things at an order level, or you can see things globally across the top banner. So in this case, for this specific order, we do have communication history. In this case, there is no communication, but this communication will track any inbound or outbound documents that were sent. So if we send an AOC follow-up letter, that'll show up in your communication history. If an AOC letter comes back, that will show up in your communication history. And then finally, the last section of an order is your mitigation history. So at this point, you can come in and see if that order went into mitigation and how that mitigation was resolved. If I go back up to the order header, something I would like to mention as well is the ability to view a sample request form. So we have sample request forms. So we are capturing your paper image within Simplicity, as well as if your order is an electronic order, Simplicity will actually create a document of record. That document of record is an electronic version of what was visible at the time the order was placed, whether that be via Viva or your SFA platform or My Sample Closet. You'll actually view a document of record. That's always handy to have that. So in case of an audit or a request for data pull, you can actually see the signature, the date, the product information that was visible at the time the order was placed. I'm going to go back to the order list page. A couple additional things. If you see these little squares, you can actually come in and select multiple orders depending on their status, and you can request cancel order. Again, this cancel order does not put the order into back order, but it puts the order into a canceled state, which is a final status within the platform. Finally, the last thing is from the front end, we also have the ability to upload an order file. So depending on your program configuration, if we're getting order files from our client and we have an ad hoc request to go ahead and process an order file outside of the schedule, we can do that through the UI screen. So that depending on your permission, you can come in and upload the file. We do have standard layouts for Simplicity. So it's important that we when we're talking to our client, that we're using the Simplicity layouts for the order file, the offer file, the target file, the zip to tear, and as well as the roster. Any deviation to those standard layouts would require change management within the program. I'm going to briefly go into the data entry page. If there was any orders in queue for data entry, it would show up in the data entry queue. Data entry, very similar to as explained on the order page, would select a record, lock the record, and they would be able to complete the data entry process. We also have the similar filters within the data entry page as well. So a data entry operator can come in and search for a specific program or job or specific order or HCP information. We can also take a look at if there's any records that are in a locked status that weren't unlocked. The system by default will unlock a record after a certain period of time. So in case somebody locks a record and forgets to unlock that record, the system will unlock that record. If the system unlocks the record, it will not save the changes that were in process. So it's very important that the users save what they're doing and unlock the record. Very similar to data entry, mitigation. If you have permission to see the mitigation screen, any order that's in mitigation status will be navigated to this page, and they will be able to come in and adjust the record or approve or fail the record. Moving over to offers. So offer data, for those that are not familiar with that, offer data is the data that prints on the sample request form that goes out to an HCP. Couple ways to get offer data. So we can get offer data either from sample request forms that are generated through Simplicity. It's a sample request form that are requested through our contact center, or if we have partnership, or if we're partnering with another vendor for our client and they are producing the sample request forms, it's always good to ask for the offer data. From a data entry perspective, we would import that offer data, and that offer data would be visible at the time the sample request form is processed. We can also upload offer data, and if you upload offer data, it will actually generate the sample request for you. So an example of that would be the client has 2 ad hoc sample requests that they would like to send out to 2 different doctors. We can share the offer file layout with them, and then that file can come in and we can generate the offer data. We can also upload the offer file, and again, that uploading that offer file will have all the offers data then visible within the offers page, so that you can see what was originally requested or offered to the HCP on their sample request form. A second way we can generate sample request forms is through target data. So if we're loading the target file into your for your program and there's a request to send sample request forms, you do have the ability through the program profile to go ahead and generate SRFs, and that will happen by selecting all of the targets within the target file that was loaded. Moving over to HCPs. So every order or every HCP that we process an order for, we actually create an HCP record, an HCP profile within the platform. HCP profiles can be created via the target file, the universe file, the offer file, or the order file. So if your program has a target file or a universe file, when that file is loaded, it will look to see if we have an HCP profile, and if not, we will create an HCP profile. Universe files are at the client level. So if you do have a universe file, that same universe file will be used across all programs within your client. If you have a target file, target files are program specific. So if your program has different targets and different business rules, most likely we'll set that up as separate programs. One of the important aspects of the Simplicity platform, in addition to creating the profile, is identifying that HCP. So we are integrated with the NIPR Corporate Master. The NIPR Corporate Master is used to identify the HCP and to provide a NIPR identification number, otherwise known as KID. That KID will follow this HCP not only through the program and through their clients' programs, but across all clients' programs, so that we know that Dr. Smith is Dr. Smith, regardless of what program they're in. If the HCP is already created within the Simplicity platform for the specific client, we will not reach out to get another KID. We'll actually use the data that's already in the platform. Within this HCP profile, there is some preliminary information we show. So we show the HCP name and KID. We show their primary address, email address if received, their primary state license, primary DEA, primary secondary authorization, or in what we know as the TDDD number, which is specific to Ohio, the status of the HCP, the primary designation, the client target ID, as well as a primary phone number and fax. Now, I reference primary throughout this entire page. That is because we do have the ability to store more than one of these different attributes for the HCP within the HCP profile. So any one of these fields can be sorted. By default, we sort by HCP name. If you see the blue indicator, that means that the field is expandable. So if you click into that HCP name, it'll bring you to the HCP detail. At that point, you can see the general information for the HCP, as well as the credentials. You do have the ability to add an additional professional designation. There are certain places within the HCP profile that you cannot delete their primary information unless you've assigned an alternate for that primary. You also have the ability to load the state and state license. So if this HCP has a state license in New Jersey and New York, we have the ability to store both of those SLN and state information. We are capturing the NPI number. The team is actually reviewing and considering making NPI mandatory, but as of now, that is an optional field that we capture. We also capture their primary address. We do have the ability to deactivate address. As mentioned before, you can deactivate the address if it's the only address tied to the HTTP. You do have to have another address as well. We have the ability to mark something as a bad address. So if you're receiving non-delivers or returned sample orders, we have the ability to mark that as a bad address and then prevent future orders from going out for that HCP. We do have the ability to capture contact information. Again, we capture the primary phone number. We do have the ability to capture secondary phone numbers. We also have the ability to flag something if it was created by the NIPR contact center. So if the NIPR contact center creates the phone number or creates the email address, then when we do a target or a universe refresh, that information will stay attached to the profile. And then finally, the related information. As I mentioned on the orders page, a lot of what we do is give you the ability to navigate to all alternate pages without needing to start over from your search. So in this specific HTTP, I can take a look at any do not honor exclusion records. So an item, an HTTP could fall onto the do not honor because they've hit their AOC limits or there was a request from the client to do not contact. We also have the ability to look at the HTTP orders for the specific HTTP as well as the communications. And then any sales rep, that information that's tied to the specific HCP. In addition to HCPs, we also have the communication. I think this tab is so very valuable and is new for a lot of us. The communication tab, as I mentioned under the orders page, shows you any inbound or outbound communication that we've sent to this HCP. So on the main page, on the list page, you get to see the communication ID. Again, the HCP information, the type of communication. Was it a rejection letter or an exception letter or an acknowledgement of content? Communication status, communication date, the form ID, the order number, the order received date, and the direction of the communication. Is it something that NIPR sent out or is it something that NIPR received? In addition, you have this little circle with a triangle. If you click on that, it gives you a little bit more information. Now, all of these fields are visible, but the visibility will vary based on your screen resolution. So by default, the first 5 fields will always be visible, but some of these other fields may fall to the second level of the list page, which is what I'm showing here. You have your communication method. How did we send that communication? What is the status of that communication, of the document itself, and not just the communication, as well as the program that this communication is related to. Again, this is at the client level, and if you wanted to sort for a specific program, you could do that by program name or job number. In addition to this little circle with a triangle, you also can click on the link for the communication ID, and you can see the additional details for that communication ID. So you can see that this was a rejection letter. You can actually click on the rejection letter and see the image that was created from the system. You can see the status, the order information, if anybody modified this communication, and the communication history. So you could see in this scenario, we created a communication, a rejection. It was in a pending status, and then we received notification that the document was completely correctly created, and then finally that it was in a sent status. If this document was a document that would be returned to NIPR, you would actually see an additional communication status if that document was received back at NIPR. In addition, you can click the resend communication. If a document has been created within the platform, you do have the ability to resend that. You can resend that either via fax or email. If you click on fax, it'll ask you to enter in a fax number and any comment that you want to include with that resend. Email, very similar. You'll enter in your email address and any comments that you want to reference with the resend that was being requested. You also can see there's a couple spots that have an active link. If you click on that active link, it'll take you to the order detail page for that specific order. Communication history is, as I mentioned, an important part of keeping track of how you're doing from a client perspective or a program perspective, and you can filter by statuses. So if you have negative negative signature verification letters, you can come in and filter for that specific. If you have communication statuses that are in an error status and or your non-delivered mail, you want to go ahead and search for those communications, as well as the document status. So you have a communication status and a document status. Just know that the communication has a life cycle very similar to an order life cycle. So we will be able to track from the time we create it to the time we send it and whether or not that communication comes back. In the case of a sample request form, when that communication comes back and that sample request form is processed, the communication life cycle ends and the order life cycle begins. Next, I'll move over to reports. So in reports, we have a standard suite of order-based reports. Your inventory reports can still be ran through the NIPRevision dashboard. Your order-based reports are reports that are specific to programs that reside in the Simplicity platform. So on these reports, you can actually come in and filter by specific information. So you can pick which client, you can pick a date range, you can pick if you want to run a report for a specific state, for example, and then what visible fields that you want to include in the report. So this visible fields will be what the fields are that show up in the actual report that's created. This is required in order for you to generate a report. And this panel here will change based on each report that you generate. Once you select your criteria, you can view report. Once you view the report, it'll actually do a preview screen, and then from there you can export in a number of different methods. You can save it, you can print it. We do have the header. If you export this in a CSV format, this header is actually removed. In this case, you can see that I selected all fields, so it'll show all fields that are available for the account. Just a couple of things to note specifically to Simplicity DTP. We are integrated with Scale, not only from an order processing perspective, but also from an inventory perspective. So when you're working with the team to do the configuration of the program, we will pull in products directly from Scale. So your product ID, your product description, and some other key attributes such as product type, those all feed into Simplicity from Scale. So it's important that we have correct and accurate information in Scale so that it pulls in properly. We also integrate with DAX and the ProMail project management system, which is where you create your job number. It is important that you use the appropriate DAX ID when creating a client in ProMail, and that DAX ID should come to you from your finance team. That DAX ID is used at Scale from a warehouse management perspective, and also used from Simplicity for a job creation. So we don't actually manually enter job numbers in Simplicity when the team is doing the configuration. It does a lookup by that DAX ID to determine the appropriate job numbers that can be available within the program. Just a couple other things to talk about. When a program is being set up, or once a program is set up, at any point you can come in and look at the program business rule details. So very similar to some of the other panels I showed you, within a program, you can actually come in, you can view all of the different configurations that were created for your program. And we do have what's called a draft and live status. So when you are creating the program or making any edits to the program, so for example, your program is up and running and you go from 2 orders per month, and now the client would like 3 orders per month. In order to make that change, the program does have to go into a draft mode. That change would happen and would not go live until that draft is approved and deployed and deployed. The person doing the configuration is not the same person who can deploy a draft into a live status. Configurations are handled by a specific team, but there is support from the account teams that with the team doing the configurations to make sure that we understand what is being configured in the system and make sure it relates to the business rule. So within each section of these configurations, you can see what the current business rule is, what the current templates are, the current products, as I mentioned, that are pulled in from Scale, your order sources. So how are your orders coming to us? Are they coming in via order file or paper or contact center or SFA? So your Viva or your IQVIA. Order validation. So we have a set of standard business rules that can be configured. There are some rules that by default will always be turned on. For example, your missing kid will always be turned on. Missing values, you can select which rules you want to check for your program. These rules today are at the program level. So if you turn these rules on, the rules will be applied. There are some exceptions to that based on the order source, but in most cases, your business rules are program specific, not order source or product specific. We do also do the same thing for your SLN, DEA, and secondary authorization. You can include which rules you want to check, again, for at the program level. At any time, you can view your reference data. The reference data will tell you how the program was set up. In this case, was your program rep driven? And is this an institutional program? And then you could also see which order sources that were set up for this specific program. The final check we do from a business rule check is your restrictive conditions. So your restrictive conditions really include things of any specialty checks that we have in place, any order limits, signature checks. Those are all part of your restrictive conditions. Once we go past our order validation rules, then we go to our order processing rules. So at this point, this is where you can set whether or not this is a priority program. And what that means is, does it take a higher queue than any other program? This is permission driven. So only select users can determine whether a program is a priority program. Your exception actions. So for exceptions, you have the ability to pass something to mitigation or a letter, and you can actually do that at the order source. So in this example, order files will go to mitigation. Any orders that fail from an order file will go to mitigation for resolution, but paper, we're not going to mitigate. We're going to send out an exception letter. We also can configure what your exception expiration date is. So how long do we let an order sit in an exception status before we move that order to exception expired? Very similar thing to rejection. You have the ability to determine based on the order sources that were created for your program, do we send a rejection letter out or not? Rejections do not go to mitigation today. A rejection is a hard stop of that specific order for that specific business rules. As well as on hold. So we do have some business rules that go to specifically on hold. The business rule in question is your AOC business rules. So how many an order goes on hold pending an AOC response, how many days do we let that order sit on hold status before we move that order to a rejection status? We also have the ability to configure auto includes. So at any point, we can set auto includes at the order level, brand level, product level, and the team will work with you during the configuration to determine what auto includes needed to be applied. We do have the ability to manage your select day processing as well as your inventory threshold. So an inventory threshold, because Simplicity DTP looks at scale to determine the inventory level, inventory threshold will allow us to hold orders back in Simplicity if you've hit that threshold. So in this example, if you're within 10% of your overall inventory that's left in the warehouse, then we will not pass any orders to the warehouse. Again, helper text for any time there's any question about what we're doing. We also have the ability to do an action if there is insufficient inventory. Today we can do 3 things. We can cancel the entire order if a line item is out of stock. We can cancel, we can call what's fill and kill, which means you cancel the line item. So if you have a line item within the order and the order quantity is 5 and we only have 4 units left in stock, if your setting is to fill and kill, it will actually kill that entire line item and fulfill the rest of the line items in the order. And then finally, which is most commonly used by our teams, is to place the entire order in back order. By putting your entire order in the back order, it allows you the opportunity to go in and adjust those orders instead of letting the system cancel off the line items or the order directly. Once an order is in a cancel status, once the line item's in a cancel status, it cannot be reprocessed. We also can set select day and then select day verification. This panel would be visible based on how you set up your product. So if your product is set up as it requires select day shipping, then what will happen is we would configure this program to which select days are available for shipping. These select days would also be what gets printed on your sample request form. Select day verification. This is really, do you want the call center or the contact center to make an outbound call to do the verification before we let that order ship? So if it's a cold chain product and before we send it to the warehouse, do we want to verify that the HCP would like the order delivered on a Wednesday or a Thursday? If we configure this program to yes, it will put a call into Salesforce, into the contact center's queue, and the contact center would then make an outbound call to verify the to verify the day of delivery. We also have order fulfillment. Order fulfillment, there's a couple sections here. One is your turnaround time. So your order turnaround time from the order receipt to order fulfillment, from validated order, I apologize, from validated order to order fulfillment, what is your SLA? This SLA is used to calculate the ship by date that's needed in scale. What is your cutoff time? By default, our latest is 2 p.m., but with some clients, we have earlier cutoff time, so you can actually configure that order cutoff time. And then your freight codes. So when an item is set up as it has to ship alone, so in many cases, your cold chain products have to ship alone, the system will break that product into its own order and then by default set what your freight code and carrier is for any item that has to ship alone. Otherwise, we do set the carrier and service code based on your product type for each order. So during the configuration, we will go through with what product types are available in your program and what is the priority of that product type. So does your RX take a higher priority than literature? So if your order during processing has an RX item and a literature item, by default, the system will apply the overnight signature required service. Whereas if the order only contained a literature item, we would go ahead and apply the shipping method that was applied to that product type. AOCs. So the program, you can set the program up to turn on acknowledgement of content follow-up. So you will be asked a question of whether acknowledgement of content is required. If so, how many letters are required? When you do your letter setups, when you pick your number, we will then determine the letters that we're gonna send out. Are we gonna send letter 1, the 15-day letter, the 30-day letter, or the 45-day letter? Your AOC follow-up calls. If in addition to sending out the letters, do we want to send a request to the contact center to make an outbound call for any acknowledgement of content that was not received? We also have the ability to trigger a call to the contact center if we do get an AOC, but that AOC is invalid. And then finally, non-compliant AOCs. What happens if we get an AOC, we have an HCP that is not compliant to the AOC rules? You can set how many days from the acknowledgement of delivery do you want that HCP moved to the do not honor list. The do not honor list would then prevent any future orders from being processed. If an HCP is on the do not honor list, those orders would immediately go to rejection. Moving on to signature verification, we do also ask very similar questions. Are signature verifications required? What type of signature verifications are we doing? Is it order-based or acknowledgement of content-based or both? And then you can set your configurations of your expectation of the amount of letters that are going out and what your response rate is for those letters. There is an algorithm on the back end that determines how those letters are pulled. And then if this was a rep-driven program, it also has an additional algorithm to make sure that a sales rep is audited at least once per year. This is a standard algorithm and it is a standard setup. So aside from setting your thresholds and your minimums and your response rates, the algorithm is standard across all programs. Moving to templates, we also do all of our template setups within the platform. So you can create your SRF template based on how your program was set up, whether it was set up with a NIPR form or a third-party sample request form, as well as your PDMA letters. There are some consistent pieces across all letters. So your logo is at the program level, not letter level. So the expectation is that you're using the same logo for each of the letters that are being printed, as well as your signature line. So your signature line, which is what shows up at the bottom of your PDMA letters, can be multiple lines. We do have the ability to add some formatting to those lines, but that would be across all of your letters. We also have the ability to determine if there's certain optional fields need to be included in your sample request form. Do we want to put an expiration date on the form? Does this sample request form require specialty? Do we need to include requester and recipient DEA information on our letters and our sample request form? And then the secondary authorization. The secondary authorization would only apply for the specific states. Sample request forms and letters, as I mentioned, are all created within the system. So we do have a standard set of templates. So it's important that when you're doing the program configuration and you're sharing templates with the client, those templates are coming out of the platform and not from our creative team or from previous programs that we've set up. For example, we have 4 unique SRF templates. Those templates are visible based on the type of the program that you've set up. Those templates actually equate to about 240 versions of a sample request form. So again, it's very important that we don't try to create these sample request forms outside of the platform, but we use the tool and we pull the sample request forms from there. You don't have to be all the way, you don't have to have your program all the way configured in order to create these templates to send to your client, but you do have to have some very specific information, such as product information, and you have to have your templates set up before you can pull them. Anytime, whether the program is live or not, if you need to preview what your template looks like, you can do that in 2 ways. You can do that through example data or merge field. So we do have sample data, example data within the platform. So in this case for the SRF, you can actually take a preview of what the SRF looks like using example data that was provided. You can do that through merge fields as well. So if you need to produce both example data and merge field, we can do that, and you can see how the SRF or the PDMA letters would look. These are the templates that should be used to send to the client for any client approval, which is part of our milestones for configuring a program. Very similar thing to SRFs. You have that same ability for your your PDMA letters. And in this example, we actually configure this program to be a third-party SRF. So we can actually upload third-party SRFs. Those third-party SRFs are just used from a reference point. They're not used because we're not maintaining the form. They're not used for any kind of SRF generation through the system. Important note is within a single program, you can have one NIPR sample request form template. So that template, again, is generic. And what you would do during that setup is determine the products, the order of the products that would fit on the page. If for some reason your sample request form is going to go to 2 pages, you will be required to update that to properly determine how many products you want on each page of the sample request form. A 2-page sample request form does become 2 separate offer IDs as well as 2 separate orders. We do not process 2-page SRFs as a single order because there is a chance they will not come in together. You can have more than one third-party template, but as mentioned, only a single NIPR template, and that NIPR template can be pre-printed or blank depending on how your program is set up. As I mentioned, we do the same thing for exception, rejection, and your AOC letters. So in this example, you can determine which letter you want to preview, and then at that point, you can preview that letter and print it or download it to send it to the clients for approval. And then your documented record. So I mentioned early on, we do have the ability to produce a documented record for any electronic order and electronic AOC that is received within the platform. And you do have the ability to preview what a documented record looks like, either in the merge field or in the sample data. So at this point, this is an example of a documented record that can be used for client review. Documented record is a NIPR template, similar to the templates above. So this is not, we do not have any custom variations to this document of record. Communications. So communication is really around how you're going to send the documentation out to the HCPs. We do have the ability to send it in multiple fashions. So in this example, HCP communication preference. How do we want to send our SRFs and AOCs? Do we want to do mail, fax, or email? You have the option to do one or multiple. So if you start with a fax and the fax is unsuccessful, then it can go to the mail and it would send a cell sheet to the print room for the print room to go ahead and print and pass that to SOD for mailing. We do have the ability to do notification communication preferences. So how do we want to notify users that we have a blackout hold? So a blackout hold is a zip code is on hold, similar to what just occurred with the winter storms that we've had, as well as the order verification holds. So do we want to email somebody if your order goes on hold because there is a verification that needs to happen or an AOC that needs to be received? And then your notification recipients. How do you want to send those? Do you want to send them to the order requester? Do you want to send it to the order recipient? You don't have to do that, but there is an option to send those emails directly to either your requester or your recipient. And then down here, these are not configurable, but this is our standard list of communications within the platform. So you can see what the communication is, what direction that communication, and who's it going to. So blank SRFs would go to the sales rep. An SRF, a sample request form, a pre-printed sample request form, it's going to go to the requester. We're also expecting a sample request form to come into NIPR from the requester. Exception letter is an outbound, and so on. So we have a standard list of communications. We also have a standard list of notification types. So we send notifications to specific teams. So for example, if we have an SRF blast, we will notify the professional services mailbox for this specific program of that successful blast that we've done. For example, the order blackout hold, we send a notification to the professional services team, letting you know that we have orders on hold for the zip code. We also have our blackout hold announcement, which goes to a distribution list, letting the users know which zip codes are currently on hold. For this blackout hold process, very different to how we handle it today. If zip codes go on hold, we load those zip codes into the Simplicity platform, and the orders are actually held upstream. When an order is held upstream, you'll actually be able to see on the orders panel that I showed you earlier, a blue banner that lets you know which zip codes and which orders are on hold. So you have full visibility to which orders have not yet been released. We also create work orders, which go to our scheduling team so that they can process the requests through Scale and so on. So this is a standard list of the notifications that we send out throughout the entire program. And then finally, last but not least, is the letters. So as part of our configurations, not only are we setting up your templates, but we're actually setting up the details for when the letters go to the print room to print. By default, we do send it to the Lakewood print processing team, and then we actually talk about the details of what is included in that SRF packet or that letter packet that goes to the print room. We include the template ID, we include the cell number, the return to stock number, and any cell sheet instructions. So whether they're print instructions or operations instructions, all of those are created at the time the program is configured. So you do have the ability to enter in information. There is a limit, so it's important that we understand what is being populated in the print and cell sheet instructions. This does not replace your OWI. So it is important that you still follow your OWI process, and the appropriate departments get the OWI that's approved by the client. What this does is triggers a cell sheet to go along with the batch of letters that need to be printed to the print room. That ends our Simplicity DTP review. Thank you.